Hi, thanks for tuning in. Beautiful day here. It's really hot already. It's around about 10 in the morning, and today I thought we'd do a honey harvest. I was looking in this side window today. You can see lots of bees, but you can also see behind them lots of capped honey, and that honey's been coming in quite a bit lately. We've been checking our hives a lot. You can see the end is quite full. I think we've harvested these 2 frames already, and even though it's not all built out on the end here, you can still see the whole side is capped honey, and so this hive is ready to harvest, and it's so easy to do. We just need a little harvesting tube. We've got our shelf brackets here, and this is a really cool little clever invention that Cedar has cooked up. They just slot onto these little screw heads here that just get backed out a tiny little bit. Got like a little bracket here, and they just slot straight on there, and the beauty of it is that your back window cover actually comes straight out and sits right in there to give you a nice little shelf. However, I think our jars are too big, so we may need to go get some smaller jars. Bijou, would you mind getting some smaller jars for us? That'd be great. While Bijou's doing that, we can just pull the top cap off here and take the bottom cap out. Sometimes you can see in here honey has just sat down a little bit in the bottom of the troughs, and if we take one of the caps out, I can show you why that is. So the frames have a little leak back point here. The hive is sloped backwards so that the honey can run out the tube, but any honey that gets left behind in the trough of the frame can drip down there, and you can see the bees crawling through there. That's actually inside the hive. They can't get out that hole, but they can actually access the honey that's stuck in the tube. It runs back down there slowly, and they lick it up through that hole. Well, what happens is bees like to propolis everything, so you can see this little propolis mark here that was in that little hole. Bees blocked it up. So what you just want to do, these caps have got these little bumps on them. You can just twist it around to clear that little hole out. So you might want to just twist that just to make sure that hole's cleared. Just twist these little things every now and again. You can see down here that honey is already dripping down that hole, and you may be able to see the bees just licking it up there. Cool, thank you very much, Bijou. She's been so good to get us some smaller jars. If you do have big jars and you do want to adjust your harvesting shelf, all you have to do is back out a screw that's further down and hang it in here. But just today we're just going to use smaller jars. So all you do, this tube has a little tongue that inserts down the bottom and straight into that slot and blocks it up, ready for the honey to come out. And we're going to stick our key into the bottom slot up here, and you want to stick it all the way to the end if you want to harvest the whole frame. You can harvest in increments if you like. You can harvest that much, which will harvest to about here in the frame, and then you can keep going, crack it a little at a time. I think we're just going to crack the whole frame at once. So all you do is turn the key 90 degrees. Sometimes it has a little bit of resistance, and you should be able to see that honey running down already. So the frame is hexagons, and when you crack the frame, it actually becomes a channel which lets the honey drain down and out into the jar. It's just beautiful, pure, clear honey. Sometimes it does have a tiny little bit of wax in it and some pollen, but it's quite good for you.
A popular question that we have is, do the bees get harmed when you harvest?
No, and it's easy to see in here. The bees are just hanging out on the comb, and the honey is actually in the cells, and the cappings don't move. Just swap the jars out. The cappings don't actually move. It's only the cells underneath the bees that move. So the bees actually have nothing really to do with it.
And the honey's flowing really fast. Does it always flow this quickly?
No. Sometimes it can take a little while to flow, but this honey is obviously quite liquidy. It just depends on the type of flowers that the bees have harvested the nectar off, and also the temperature of the honey and how much the bees have dried the honey out. So some honeys can be quite thick, others can be quite liquid. So this is flowing out very quickly. Sometimes it can take a couple of hours to drain a whole frame, and sometimes a couple of minutes. So it just really depends on what your bees have been collecting at the time.
And it is a very hot day here today as well.
It is very hot, so the honey will be warm. The bees do keep their hive at 35 degrees Celsius. That's the temperature of the nest, and that heat emanates up into the honeycomb.
And do you ever get any wax in the honey?
You can get a couple of little droplets of wax, but you just don't have to filter. You can see it's already clear. And as opposed to getting honey in the traditional way, which involves pulling your super off and getting all the bees out and spinning the honey in an extractor and uncapping it all and separating the wax from the honey and letting it settle and then filtering it. This is a really, really easy way of harvesting the honey. Of course, you still do have to look after your bees, and your bees are in the brood box down below. I should say the bee's nest is in the brood box.
And we don't have any bees surrounding the honey. We often get asked, where are the bees?
The bees are around the other end at the entrance. So where you harvest from is the rear of the hive, away from the entrance, and the bees don't generally come around here. If they're quite hungry, they might smell the honey, and we may get one or two bees at the end, but they generally don't even bother. They're too busy gathering nectar to worry about it. So you can see the honey slowing down a little bit now. As the frame begins to empty, the rate of flow starts slowing down a little bit. So you may want to harvest into a large jar to avoid swapping jars, or you may want to harvest straight into your lovely little jars. It makes a really great Christmas present actually to give to your family. It's beautiful little jars of honey.
So when you harvest a large jar, do you have to move the shelf further down?
Yeah, that's right. So if you want to move your shelf brackets here further down, you just back one of these screws out accordingly, and you can move this bracket down and that bracket down. You have a lot more room underneath.
And a few people have commented on the different colours of honey that you get from the flow hives.
So it's a really wonderful thing. Bees actually practice what's called flower fidelity. It's a funny kind of name, but what it means is that they'll work a certain flower species and they'll put all of it together in the hive, which means all the nectar from one flower can go in this frame, all the nectar from another flower can go in this frame, and so on. So you might get a very light honey in one frame and a very dark honey in another frame. You can even see what they've done in this frame. Some of the cells have quite a dark honey, others have quite a light honey. And you can see these cells are capped off, they're actually ready to harvest, or they're actually ready to store for the bees, because it is the bees' food. So we always need to make sure we leave enough for the bees, and that can vary on the amount that you want to leave and the time of year, and you really need to pay attention to what is flowering around you and what season to make sure you make a good decision around that. But generally speaking, if you've got a single brood box, 1 or 2 flow frames full of honey is a fine amount to leave them year round as they kind of build up and slow down in times of dearth, which is a time of no flowers. I can see this honey's starting to run out. If we look in the side window, you can see just here the cappings have gone a lot lighter than they were before. And you can see there's no honey inside. What the bees will then do, they'll sense that there's nothing underneath. We don't really know how they sense it, but they do. And they start chewing that capping away. And that'll take a little while, and then they just start reusing the frame. They fill it again. It's pretty cool and amazing. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 jars so far. You should get around about 2.8 litres of honey per frame. So if you add that up over a hive, it's quite a lot.
And this is a 7 frame size.
That's right.
Do you have any preference in this area between a 7 or a 6 frame size?
Not personally, but obviously a 7 frame hive will yield more honey. The compatibility of the 7 frame super works with a 10 frame Langstroth brood box. So in this brood box there's 10 brood frames, the wooden ones. And in our smaller hive, which is a 6 frame, it's compatible with an 8 frame Langstroth box. So it's all standard sizing. And the benefit of this one, of course, the bigger one, is that you get another frame of honey. Probably a drawback is that it's a lot heavier to lift. So if you are not keen to lift a heavy super off to check your brood box, you may want to go for the smaller hive, the 6 frame version. You can keep a bigger colony in the brood box and you get a little bit more honey in this one. But it's also a little bit more work in terms of beekeeping.
And we have a question here from the YouTube live. Someone's asking, just because the cells at the front are full, how do you know the whole frame is full, especially the ones away from the window?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes what can happen is the bees can get hungry, and even though these cells are full at the back here, what happens is the bees live down in their brood box. They can come up as a cluster and eat the honey out of the middle of the frame. So a good way to tell is go in the side window here, and if you see capped honey, then probably your middle frames are full, because the bees generally start in the middle. However, they do start eating in the middle as well. So if you really want to be sure, you put your suit on and light your smoker and just crack the hive and pull those middle frames out and check them out. If we come around here, we can see on this side we've got no honey. and it's because we've already harvested that a little while back. The bees have cleaned everything up, they've chewed all the capping off, and it's all looking pretty ready to roll. And I was just wondering if I could see any nectar there. I can't see it, but it is coming in at the moment, so they may be filling an adjacent frame first before they start getting onto this one. But the reverse applies also. If you think you've got no honey in your super and you're wondering, wow, how long is this going to take? Sometimes the bees can fill a whole flow frame, and they're a bit shy of light, so when this cover is actually in, there's a little bit of light that comes through this crack, and the bees don't sort of like it very much and they stay away from it. And what that can mean is that they don't fill to the end of the frame. So it is worth suiting up and lighting your smoker and just pulling out a couple of your flow frames and checking to see if there's honey. You may have quite a lot of honey in your frames ready for harvest, but you're not quite seeing it in the window yet. Having said that, if you just leave the bees to it, they will eventually fill out to the window when they start running out of space and they need to just put honey somewhere. So we are having a nice flow at the moment. The bees in our apiary are bringing lots of honey in and lots of pollen. You can see them on the landing board over here coming in. You may want to watch your landing board. It's actually a really beautiful thing to do, especially in the morning when you first wake up and you go out and you just come and hang over the side and watch your bees do their thing. It's really quite a relaxing thing to have your coffee and watch your bees. You can tell a lot from what's going on the landing board. You can tell actually a hive's population. You can see there's lots of bees hanging out, just kind of at ease, I suppose. The population is quite good. If there was nobody on here, just a couple of bees coming and going, you might see that and think, oh, there's maybe not as much population. Whereas if you've got these bees hanging around, you know, oh, there's lots of bees free, ready to work. I saw some pollen coming in, some really lovely yellow pollen, and a drone just here. Drone is hanging out here, about to go in.
And when it gets really hot and you notice them bearding out the front there, are there any things that you can do to help cool the hive for them?
Not really. That bearding is the way that they actually cool their hive. They remove their bodies from it and prevent their body heat from being inside the hive. And they do have evaporative cooling as well, where they will actually mist water across their brood comb and then fan their wings out the front. You can see one bee fanning its wings there. They actually unhook their flight muscles from their wings, just stopped, and vibrate their wings. There it goes on the landing board. And when lots of them do that, it creates an updraft in the hive and cools the hive down. You can help them by providing a little bit of shade if it's really, really hot, especially in the afternoon. In Australia, of course, we face our hives north to get the sun in the entrance all day. In the afternoon you want that western shade because it does get quite hot. But having said that, bees do contend with the heat quite well. They're quite adept at heating and cooling their hive, and as I said before, they keep their brood nest at 35 degrees Celsius, which is quite warm. It's almost our human body temperature, almost. So if it's around about that temperature, they're still going to be okay. Also, bearding out the front is not just a sign that it's really hot. It can be a sign of swarming. It really depends on the season. If it's springtime, there's heaps of nectar coming in. The bees are building up really, really quickly. They really want to swarm, and that's their natural tendency. So what they do is they beard out the front, and you may want to check them and see if you find any queen cells, or they may just be hot. See, this is honey slowing down a little bit. You can see there's some still just left in the cells here. It'll keep draining down. What I like to do is look down the tube. Sometimes I can shine my phone torch down there and you can see droplets of honey dropping from the top down in the tube, and when that stops I know, okay, it's time to close the frame back up into its hexagonal position and leave them be. You can also see the bees in here. They're actually, you can see those little bits of wax. They're chewing those caps off already. Hopefully you can see that. They've just got little bits of wax pulling them around, and they'll reuse that. They'll clean it all up, reuse it.
And we've had someone point out that frame 3 there is a lot darker in colour.
That's right. So that's just a darker honey that's come in. It's probably old. We probably just haven't harvested it for a long time. And these ones have the new honey in. It's probably missed getting harvested. So I did mention before that bees work one floral source and put it in the same place in the hive all together. And so one frame you can have a certain type of honey, another frame will have a different type of honey. So it's just what floral source the bees are working at the time. Some honeys are very light in colour and other honeys are very dark in colour, and there's everything in between. And depending on what they're working at the time will affect the colour and flavour. Got to get my words out. So I might shut this down because I can't see any drips anymore. And to do that, you simply pull the key out, insert it into the top slot till it hits the end, and turn 90 degrees. And you may want to wait a little while for the rest of this honey to run out. If you pull the tube out now, some honey may kind of run out there, so you may want to just wait until the rest runs out. But the bees will continue to clean up everything in the hive because they don't like open honey in the hive. So any kind of honey that remains in the cells, they'll chew off the cell capping and they'll clean everything up, and they'll put that honey elsewhere in the hive. They'll either eat it or put it elsewhere. Here's a cool sight down here, is bees actually preparing cells. They've got their heads right down in there. And these ones are just sticking their heads a little way down. See this one coming in. This one's about to wriggle out. Maybe.
And how long will it take for the bees to fill that frame with honey again?
That's a really good question. Sometimes it can take a couple of days in a strong flow. Sometimes the flow can shut down just after you've harvested, and it won't be till another flow, another month or two. Just really depends on the season. If your nectar is just kind of slowly coming in, it can take several weeks to several months, or several weeks to a month, I should say. Sometimes it can take longer, sometimes shorter. It all depends on the strength of your colony and what's in flower that they're working. Usually they're depending on tree flowers or crop flowers, so something that there's a real lot of. So generally your small garden isn't going to sustain a hive because it's got 40 to 60,000 bees. But having said that, it's great to plant flowers for your bees, and it's a really beautiful thing to do. But the bees are more relying on flowering trees than small plants. Although if you're an urban beekeeper, there are so many gardens in the city that bees generally have access to a real multitude of flowers all year round as people's gardens go in and out of bloom. So urban beekeeping can be a really great thing to do. A lot of people put their hives up on rooftops, in city blocks, up on skyscraper rooftops. The bees do quite well up there, and don't hassle anybody obviously because they're up really high. They're already out straight. They fly straight out and they can access everything that's around. So yeah, that it is a bit of a question with no answer. How long does it take? But it just really depends. And what it actually helps to do is put beekeepers in touch with the natural world around them. They tend to start realizing they need to pay attention to what's in flower, and they start looking for bees everywhere. You might hear a hum and you look up and, oh, this tree's in flower and the bees are working it. And you can keep a little nectar diary. This tree was in flower at this time of year. It really helps going forward. Next year you look at your diary and go, okay, this tree might want a flower now. And you can know what to expect and when. It's a really great thing to do. It makes you more aware of what's happening in your area. We've just got drips now. So we'll just put the tube out, put the cap back in, and you can see the last of the honey there just draining down through that gap. The bees will clean that up. Like I said, they don't really like open honey in their hive, so they'll always clean it up straight away. And you can see this when you check your brood box. If you've got honeycomb sort of in funny places, cross comb, things like that, you actually break it apart. When you go to lift frames out, the bees will just clean that up straight away. And sometimes if you've got too much honey, the flow's coming in too quick for you to handle, the bees will sort of build up above the flow frames, below the inner cover. They'll stash honey there, or if your inner cover cap is popped out, the bees will actually come up into the roof cavity and build heaps of honeycomb up there. And some people really love that, but I find it quite a pain to deal with. But what I was going to say is if you scrape that all off and break the honey apart and leave it, the bees will clean it up within half an hour. So if you do find that, you can actually just break all the cappings apart and put the roof back on, and the bees will just sort it all out for you. They'll leave some empty wax there and you can just scrape it off.
We have a question from Rob. He's wondering where the super or honey box reserve is for the bees.
Yep, that's a great question. So generally in the brood box here, we've got at least 2, sometimes more, frames of honey only. So they're the brood frames, the wooden frames, and they contain honey. And they usually put those on the outside here, and then nest in the middle. And generally we wait until that happens. The bees have filled those frames with honey until we can put our super on, and we can say, all right, well, I'm going to leave these 2 frames, or pick a couple of frames, it can vary of course, for the bees, and then just take the middle ones or just take the outside ones, or we always want to leave a frame or 2 for the bees. But generally in a single brood box, depending on where you are in the world and your climate, generally there's enough honey in your brood box to sustain your colony. But yeah, having said that, you probably want to leave a couple of flow frames full of honey, as it is the bees' food, and they store it to get through times of no nectar. For instance, winter, and like a cold winter, and of course in Australia it's usually or here at least, it's the summer where it's really hot and the flowers have all shut down.
So Mike has come back and he's asking, can a single flow hive sustain 2 brood boxes?
So if I understand the question correctly, he's asking 2 brood boxes stacked on top of each other, meaning a brood box here with no queen excluder and another brood box here. The nest is 2 boxes high and a single flow super. And the answer is yes, for sure. You may just have to be onto your harvesting regime a little more diligently than otherwise, because you've got so many bees bringing in nectar. And the other thing is, you may want to leave more honey for them during the winter time, if that's when your dearth is, because you've got a lot more bees in the colony in your brood box. But yes, definitely a single flow super can be put onto a double brood box, and lots of beekeepers do it that way. It just requires a little more attention and checking. So you want to check your window and make sure if this is full, then you harvest, because what can happen is the bees just run out of room, and that triggers their swarm response. So it's so easy to harvest all that beautiful honey. It just looks so lovely up there in the sun. Makes me want to try it. I'm not sure what floral source this is from, this nectar or this honey. There we go. But it looks really light and lovely. And as I said before, it makes a great Christmas gift. The honey straight from the hive and straight into the jar. Oh, looks like I forgot a cap here. I think I pulled that off to demonstrate something. Are there any more questions, Bija?
There's no more questions coming through. Mike was saying he has a hive, installed his first hive. He has 5 acres of flowering blackberries, 20 metres away from the hive. Does this mean his hive will develop fast?
Yes, if the blackberries are in flower. I can't do this from back here. Yes, when the blackberries flower, the bees will work those, and they will grow quickly to do that, and that nectar will help them grow. I guess the colony sort of plays a bit of a gambling game. It judges what's going to happen, and the queen lays for that occurrence. So generally, as the weather warms up and the flowers start to bloom, the queen starts laying to try and get as many bees as possible into the colony for when the nectar flow hits. So the colony builds and builds to be able to have a lot of field force ready to work that nectar flow. And so when your blackberries are flowering, absolutely, the colony should work it and build up on those. Was it blackberries or blueberries? I'm not sure about blackberries.
Blackberries.
For some reason I heard blueberries, so I know they work blueberries, but I assume they work blackberries. Yeah. So I think that's all we've got time for today. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.